Before we get started, we just wanted to say thank you to Old Republic Surety for sponsoring this episode of Let's Get Surety, as well as NASBP's virtual seminars for the fourth year in a row. For more information on Old Republic Surety, visit www.orsurety.com. Now, on to our show.
You're listening to Let's Get Surety. Let me hear your bonding talk with Kat Shamapande.
Hey everyone, it's Kat Shamapande. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Let's Get Surety. Today we're going to be talking about an important issue. We're going to be talking about what contractors need to consider when they're looking at managing cash flow in 2022. So I've got with me my co-host, Mark McCallum. Hey, Mark.
Great to be with you, Kat.
Always good to have you on with me. And to talk about this important topic, we have our guest today, Bill Hughes, CPA and partner at Grassi Advisors and Accountants in the New Jersey office. Thanks so much for being on, Bill.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Kat and Mark.
Well, before we dive into cash flow, you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself and about Grassi?
Sure. I've been in accounting for over 30 years now as a CPA. I'm trying not to give away my age. And I've been with Grassi and Company for about 10 years, close to 10 years now. We had merged with them actually 10 years ago. We're actually about the 65th largest firm in the country. We have about 375 accountants, employees. We have multiple offices all over the New York metro area. Our main office is based out of Long Island. I work out of our northern New Jersey office. We have a New York City office. We recently opened in the last year an office up in the Boston area. We've been growing quite a bit. Since we joined the firm 10 years ago, our founding partner, Lou Grassi, had started the firm back in the middle to late 80s. And the firm, we've been growing organically. Construction is actually our largest niche within the firm. It probably represents about a third of our practice. It also includes our real estate group as well. We're pretty well known in I'll say the East Coast, but we're one of the larger CPA firms in the construction arena in the New York metropolitan area.
Well, that's great to know a little bit more about Grassi. Sounds like you guys have got a lot of expertise and experience that you can share.
We do, and, we work for a lot of the bigger contractors, who are, work across the entire country. Some of them are foreign owned that we handle, and we handle all the U.S. operations. But we've been a pretty big player in the New York metropolitan area for quite some time now.
Yeah. So we're gonna dive in and talk about cash flow on this episode. And we're coming off 2020 and 2021, some pretty unpredictable years with a lot of changes. Is that really affecting the way cash flow management is happening for 2022?
It's been a big concern for many of our contractors. Obviously 2020, I think we all remember back to like Friday, March 13th, Friday the 13th, when a lot of our offices, closed, we all started working from home at that point. We actually closed all of our offices beginning that Friday into that Monday. A lot of New York City at the time, where a lot of our contractors' work is based, was entirely shut down at the time. I mean, I think, everybody kind of looks back in that March, April time period, and it was just a new way to do business for all of us. And a lot of our contractors, if they were doing work in New York City, all of their projects were stopped. And closed down. And in a lot of the outlying areas, whether it's Long Island or some of the northern counties of New York outside New York City, kind of followed suit in the short term along with New York City.
Yeah, and then moving into 2021, COVID remained to be an issue. There's been a lot of other issues related to supply chain and workforce that have also impacted the construction industry.
Yeah, I mean, just looking back at that time, I mean, the government obviously stepped in and started a lot of the PPP loans, back in April of, 2020. That certainly, helped from a cash flow perspective for many of our contractors. A lot of them never would have survived had those PPP loans not been available. I have a number of just smaller contractors that I handle that, their work was shut down completely in New York City. Without those loans, it would have, they certainly would have probably not survived. For some other contractors, it was actually a boon to some of their business, with the PPP loans, because they were doing, jobs that were, projects that were deemed as necessary at the time, where they're working on hospitals, obviously were a priority at the time. Some of, just services, general New York City services, whether it was working for the subways and that kind of stuff. I mean, that was all deemed as necessary, necessary project work, whereas others, I had some that worked in the financial district, on interior type of work. All of that was shut down. It was, that was a major problem for some of those contractors. The financial services industry still hasn't returned to their offices, dating back to, March of 2020. So they've all been working predominantly from home since, for well over 18 months now. And, who knows, we're hearing a lot of people are going back beginning January of 2022, but, we'll see what happens with all that.
Well, certainly, having a contractor who's adept at managing cash flow is near and dear to surety professionals' hearts, and certainly can make a tremendous impact on their bonding program. We just talked about how it's very unpredictable what 2020, 2021, what happened. Going into 2022, there seems to still be a lot of unknowns. So managing that cash flow has got to be critically important. And yet there's probably some common pitfalls that you probably see in servicing your clients. Could you kind of go through some of the pitfalls or things to be avoided, or at least for contractors to prepare themselves for as they're trying to be adept at managing their cash flow?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big things is we try and tell our contractors, you have to look out at that 12 to 18 month period. That's still there today. Obviously it was imperative back in, March of 2020 when no one knew what was going to happen.
Right.
Back then it was hold on to your cash and, cherish it. I think the PPP loans relieved a lot of that pressure for people. And in the short term, I'll say that short term was the succeeding 12 months. That helped a lot of contractors, but they still needed to, project out and at least, monitor their cash flow on that short term 12 to 18 month period. We typically have our contractors look at least 2 years out. And back in 2020, obviously backlogs, bidding on work stopped. Right. Project owners just stopped projects and didn't give new dates that were coming out as to when they'd start up. Some of those projects have yet to start up, but that became a priority for contractors to, think hard and fast about, projects in front of them, and potential backlog. So, like I said, even today, 2021, I think a lot of work has been delayed and continued to be delayed, which is more of a hangover from 2020.
Right.
And it's kind of rolling into 2022 now. I think we're starting to see movement, and I think contractors are generally starting to see movement that projects are coming back up on the screen, whether they're now being opened up to bid, and, some owners are, looking to resume their projects. We can get into a lot of the other messes we're seeing now with supply shortages. Yep. And, you had mentioned that, and it's become a big issue now with some of these projects, where it's caused additional delays. And it's put pressure on owners who want to get their projects completed, and, they can't, because they can't get, whether it's, we hear crazy stories about people paying plywood, a sheet of plywood, and it's, prior to the pandemic was, 50 cents a sheet. We've heard crazy stories, guys paying $25.
Wow.
Wow.
But it's stuff like that that's, just caused, the supply lines are, everybody's seen, I think on the news, you've all seen pictures of the Los Angeles ports, and they've got, they've got these big supply ships sitting out there. It looks like hundreds of them in the pictures.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
and a lot of these construction materials are sitting on some of those.
So it sounds like with all these, I'll call them challenges, and with work coming back on board, I would think that being a discriminating contractor about the types of contracts or jobs you undertake would be even more important than maybe even in the past. Would you agree with that?
I would definitely agree with that. I mean, contractors historically, you always hear that story. Oh, I took the job to keep my guys busy.
Yep.
And, we all know how that story ends. That story doesn't end well typically
Right.
for contractors. But they get into that mentality that, I've got to take this work for the sake of having work. And, sometimes they'll take the wrong job. It may be a job that, a type of job that they're not adequately prepared for. I mean, we've seen, some trade contractors go in and try and act as a general contractor going forward. And that's not an easy step for them to make.
Right. Right.
And you'll see them bid, I'm going to build this job a lot tighter, and I'm going to make, my profit back on the change orders. That's another one of those stories that just doesn't, typically work. Where we've seen a lot of pressure lately has been obviously on the supply shortage, and, for jobs that, let's say, got delayed anywhere from 6 to 12 months, some of these material costs have, increased anywhere from 25 to 75%, back to their original bid estimate. So it's made it a little bit tough on contractors. Smart owners, are stepping up to the plate and working with some of their contractors. Obviously, they've all got to meet somewhere. They want to get the projects done, and that's the number one priority. And, owners have to, the good owners are going to bend a little bit, and they know that, there's a lot of pressure on their contractors, and how they're dealing with that is going to go a long way to help everybody.
So, when you're talking about material cost, material scarcity, are you seeing contractors then upfront try to deal with that with the owner, whether that's through advanced purchase or arrangements to store materials ahead of time, or things that they're trying to do that also might impact their cash flow?
Some of them they're trying to get some clauses in their contract to account for any of the major material increases. That's not, it hasn't been the easiest thing to negotiate with owners or general contractors, but it kind of goes back to where I say there has to be a little bit of communication amongst all the parties, because everyone's in the same boat.
Yep.
And, general contractors, their profit margins obviously are, have always been tight, and, they're functioning at single digit gross profit margins typically. And the trade contractors, obviously they have bigger profit margins, but, they've got all the major expense, and they need to, they need to get it from the general contractors who are working with the owners. So, all three parties really need to communicate and kind of be a little bit more open with their pricing too. That's not the simplest thing. Nobody wants to give away, their magic elixir, I'll say,
Right.
with, how they make their money. But, in some cases, they're going to have to be a little bit more open about it.
So we've kind of heard about the importance of making those projections, the importance of planning for the challenges in the current contracting environment, and how the PPP loans kept some contractors afloat. It's kind of interesting to see what happens when that is no longer part of their equation. Are there other things that can enhance the contractors' cash flow at this point? Like, for example, do you find contractors knowledgeable about tax credits and the types of credits that they can go after?
Yeah, I mean, that's employee retention tax credits were actually brought out, earlier this year to look at, your 2020 declines versus your 2019.
Right.
They've extended that up through the third quarter of this year, 2021. They've also been an additional, I'll say cash flow incentivized thing for contractors to go through. I mean, it takes a little bit of work, but anybody who's had a decline from 19, for 2020, the decline had to be more than 50% for a comparable quarter, 20 versus 19. They actually lowered it this year to make it a little bit more eligible for more contractors to actually 20% on 21 versus the same comparable quarter in 2019. We've done quite a bit of work, assisting our clients with that, helping them prepare. They've had to go back and amend payroll tax returns, but
Right.
that's been a big tax credit that has pretty much applicable for many of our contractors across the board. It's not a huge tax savings, but it's certainly been, a plus to any of them. That kind of goes back, the PPP loans, like you mentioned earlier, those helped carry everybody through 2020. Yep. That money's not there anymore.
Right.
And, some of the ones who did need it, they've basically spent all that money by now. And now they're dependent upon new work going forward and,
Yep.
Continued backlog and current work. So, the days we're not going to see any more PPP loans out there. So they're pretty much all on their own going into next year now.
Well, and with so much uncertainty, it makes me wonder, have contractors been maybe reticent to invest in technology that could help them with cash flow as well?
Contractors have been probably at the bottom of the IT technology boom. They typically have not expended, the money in, on the growth and improving all their IT. Obviously, some of the better contractors have put a priority on that in the past. We typically always try and push our clients in that direction, because it can be, for the money put up front, there's a big return on it, to get back, things like cash flow, things like better reporting in-house so they have a better idea and a handle on their budgeting, their expenses. In the long run, the IT expenditure is definitely beneficial to them as long as they put in the effort. I mean, it takes a lot of time. and work amongst their staff to really do it. And typically it comes, if it gets pushed down from the top as something they want to do, it will typically, work out for our contractors. But, they have to make the effort and train their staff and go forward with it. But that definitely ends up working out for them.
Right. What
neglecting it doesn't help.
It doesn't help anybody ever. Right?
And they typically, and I don't want to pick on contractors, but they've been known to kick the can down the road. I don't want to spend the $100,000 it's going to take to, bring in a new accounting software package, buy some new hardware amongst, their accounting department, their estimating department. That's where we've seen a lot more money on the IT side has been more in the estimating department, the project management fields. There's a lot of, some of the better construction companies are using iPads out in the field amongst all their project managers, their superintendents. It's better for payroll reporting. They don't waste as much time. They have direct access to, some of the software systems within the company. So, even on the safety side, it's worked a lot better for construction companies who have expended some of the money in that area.
Right. Certainly, I would think, particularly contractors who do public work, having compliance systems in place are vitally important, and not doing that can be a considerable impediment. Are you hearing concerns, at least from your end, on the recent vaccine executive order that was put in place, and contractors trying to figure out how to comply with that and what the cost will be in doing so?
We haven't heard so much complaining recently, I'll say. I mean, when we go look back at 2020, it was a big expenditure for companies. Yep. And it was an expenditure that they didn't really know the full extent of at the time.
Yeah.
I think they've kind of at least wrapped their hands around it a little bit. Like if it came back tomorrow, if they, put back some of the mandates we had, back in the middle of 2020, they're a little bit more prepared for it now. And some of them have put in, safety measures that, they previously never had. They think about, job numbers, I think back to when they were talking about elevators. Guys were spending all day long going up and down elevators because it could only hold 3 people safely.
Right.
Yeah.
You couldn't be within 6 feet of one another, and some of those earlier restrictions. Companies have now learned how to deal with a lot of that. All the masks initiatives and many of the other things that have been implemented have helped all that now. And I think now we're kind of ready for it a little bit. Not 100%, but
it's actually good to hear that, you're seeing folks that are prepared, that they're, it's not starting from scratch. They've been through 2020, 2021. And so, they're in better position to know their cost and how to move that forward.
Yeah. And I think they understand it may happen again.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think they're all a little bit leery, that if it happens again, I don't want to be behind the 8 ball like they were, I'll say 18 months, a year and a half ago,
Right.
And we've all gotten a little bit more comfortable with the uncertainty, I think.
Yes. I think everybody's, it's like we keep hearing stories of outbreaks, we've heard them for the past, year and a half, whether it was the Delta, or just, specific areas. Obviously I'm here in New York, and, we hear of outbreaks, in different counties, and, and it's, they've just kind of learned to deal with it.
So are there other issues on the horizon that you think contractors need to be aware of, going into 2022? that particularly are going to impact their cash flow management?
The big one has been more job planning and kind of looking at their project requirements for the next 12 to 18 months. And I mean, that kind of goes hand in hand with the cash flow, but I think they have to understand their backlogs. They have to understand their margins, how they're working, how they're working on all their jobs and some of the cycles on some of their projects. I mean, there's some projects, where they know they're going to get paid every 30 to 45 days. There's other projects where they know they're not going to get paid for 60 to 90 days.
Right.
And then, if they do encounter problems, I mean, I was just talking to a contractor today, he one of these projects had shut down. The owner went bankrupt. This is well over a year ago. They're finally now settling, on some of their receivables. They're going to end up collecting, 50 cents on the dollar, but 50 cents on the dollar is a lot better than when they thought they were going to be lucky to get 10 cents on the dollar.
Yeah.
So, they can at least now plan a little bit better for next year because they were certainly a little bit tight with cash and they were looking at some of their projects differently.
Well, I'm going to go a little bit further afield on an accounting topic. And so not to put you on the spot, but it's my understanding that FASB's lease accounting standards are going to go into effect. Is it December, correct? Or so they may have already gone into effect. Are you hearing any concerns from contractors on how that will be treated on their statements and how it will be viewed by others like lenders?
Where we've heard more is more on the lending, on the bank and the investors, the banking side.
Okay.
I don't think they've yet really wrapped their hands around what they're going to be looking at. Our contractors, we don't have a lot of, I'll say, contractors that have a lot of note reporting or lease reporting.
Okay.
It's somewhat basic to some degree. And on a real estate side, it's extensive.
Yep.
The lease reporting. So it's going to be, they're the ones who are a little bit more worried about it, I'll say, than our contractors. And a lot of our contractors obviously are involved in real estate, and whether they own their own properties or their own buildings that they're leasing out. But on the banking side, that's where we've been hearing a lot of the pressure from. And our clients as contractors, they're not getting good responses from the banking side on, what they're going to be looking at as far as covenants go. They have current covenants.
Yeah.
They might as well take all those and throw them out the window because they're no longer going to apply underneath all the new reporting. So, and I think everybody's way behind on catching up with any of that, and particularly on the banking side.
So does that mean that the construction and surety industry has needs to undertake an effort to educate lenders in terms of at least our perspective on what it might mean?
I do, and I think we need to work a little bit more closely with them because I think, as an example, there's a lot of working capital covenants that are built into, line of credits, borrowing facilities, most of them aren't going to, they're not going to be applicable anymore because we're now going to be putting, new liabilities on their books, for these long-term operating leases that they have out there. So it's going to be, they haven't addressed it yet. And that's kind of where the problem is. And they've had their own problems, the banking industry. And many bankers that we deal with, they haven't even been back to their offices, and they've been in industry, much like a lot of the financial services industry, where they've continued to work remotely, and they've kind of pushed it actually upon all their employees.
Wow. Well, so it sounds like another factor in 2022 that people need to be aware of. So,
yes, definitely.
Yeah, well, thanks for taking some time, Bill, and talking with us just about some pitfalls you might find as a contractor when you're looking at cash flow, especially moving into another year that, as we go through 2022, is probably going to be at least as unpredictable as the last two.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. And, is just to make sure that you can deal with uncertainty. I mean, we don't have a lot of answers, as we've seen in the last 2 years. And I think it's going to continue into 2022, at least, probably the first half of it. I think, if we can get majority of all this pandemic, COVID era behind us, it'll start to bring a little clarity for everybody going forward. I think this, the uncertainty is still out there, and it's still there with, our owners, our contractors, a lot of the people out there doing work are, they're undecided on things.
Let's hope. Let's get through this because we all want to be on the other side. Thanks, Bill.
Maybe we'll have you back to kick off 2023 and it'll be a rosier prediction.
Yes, I look forward to doing that.
You've been listening to Let's Get Surety, brought to you by the National Association of Surety Bond Producers. For more information about the NASBP and its members, visit nasbp.org.
Before we go, we just wanted to say thank you again to Old Republic Surety for their generous support in sponsoring this episode of Let's Get Surety. For more information on Old Republic Surety, visit www.orsurety.com.